Let's talk about renting equipment, why I think you should do it, and who you should use. First of all, I think that renting equipment is extremely valuable. I've made a few other videos about this before, but I can't stress the point enough that renting equipment is really, really, really valuable, especially if you do a lot of different productions that have different needs from production to production. You can rent the gear you need for that production, move to the next one, use a totally different set of gear, different cameras, different microphones, different lights, rent it for that one, and then move to the next and the next and the next. Also, oftentimes there's gear that you don't always need, and it's really expensive to invest $1,000, $2,000, $10,000 in a piece of gear that you're only going to use 5 different times. That may or may not make sense for your particular production, so keep all this stuff in mind. I think a lot of people stay away from the rental option because they feel like they're just losing money. But when you look at it, you're paying a tenth of the price of the item for that one particular time where you needed it, compared to having to buy it and invest in it, or buy the cheaper knockoff version and deal with something that's subpar. I rent gear all the time, but I also have gear that I own that, depending on the project, depending on the need, I pick and choose what makes sense and what doesn't. Obviously, if you're doing video production full-time, you have gear that you know you're gonna need. I would recommend having a camera, buying some kind of camera that you can use time and time again for pretty much any project. For me, that's been the GH4. For other people, it's the A7S, the A7S Mark II, the 5D Mark III, C100, C300, C500, Red Epics, Red Weapons, Red Scarlets. There's so many different cameras out there. Buy the one that makes the most sense for you. For me, the camera that makes the most sense is the cheapest one that does the best quality I can get. And for me, that matchup has been very nice with the GH4. It's done a tremendous amount of work, but it doesn't always make sense in every occasion. On occasion, I have rented an FS7 or an FS5 or a Red Epic or any other kind of camera that's out there that makes sense for that project. I don't even like the small sensor camcorder live event broadcast type cameras, but I have rented those from time to time when it made sense for the production. It happened to be a live production, and so that's the kind of camera that made sense for that equation. I've also rented specialty equipment like the Kessler second shooter for 3-axis motion control on my slider. I've rented external monitor/recorders to get a little bit higher quality footage when I've needed it. I've rented wireless mics to expand the amount of wireless mics that I have. I've even rented specific lenses that I know I don't need all the time, but they made a lot of sense for that particular project. Now, when you're looking for rental options, I think there's a few options. You can look on Craigslist to see if there's some person out there who just is renting the gear out. That's one option. I don't particularly find that the most trustworthy source, but if you make a friend or a connection that way, it can be an inexpensive way to rent gear. You can also look for rental shops locally. Here in Scottsdale, we have mp&e, and I've used them a few times. We also have Broadcast Rentals downtown Phoenix, and it's nice to have someone on hand in town, and you can go over, check out the gear, and get it immediately. And you have an expert who's right there to answer your questions and give you their recommendations. Another option that I use quite frequently is online rental services such as Lens Rentals, Borrow Lenses, Lens Pro To Go, and there's a few others out there that you can find. I personally prefer Lens Rentals the most because they seem to have the selection of gear that I'm looking for, as well as more affordable pricing compared to some of the other sites. But it can be a situation where Lens Rentals is sold out of something and you need to go to Lens Pro To Go or Borrow Lenses or one of the others to find what you're looking for. These work really well because they do tend to be the cheapest. Because they're shipping out gear to you, they kind of want you to have it for extended periods of time, so the pricing per day actually comes down. If you're looking at shops locally, it can be a little bit more expensive per day, but with these shipping sites, they'll send you something and they want you to keep it for 3 or 4 days, and so the price per day comes down quite a bit. You could have something for 4 days from one of these online sites that you would pay for 1 day locally at a shop. It just depends, and you have to find out what makes the most sense. But oftentimes the online sites, they don't have the bigger stuff. You know, they don't have the big lights, the bigger cameras, the stuff that's really specialty like anamorphic lenses, and you might have to go someplace locally for that kind of stuff. So it's kind of a mix and match equation. So what I like to do is look at lens rentals, see if I can get what I'm looking for the cheapest and for the longest period of time. But if they don't have something that I'm looking for, I go somewhere locally like mp&e in the case here in Scottsdale. I think they have a few other locations, but I'll talk to them and say, hey, they didn't have this particular thing I was looking for online. Do you have that, or can you find someone else who does? And 9 times out of 10, they're gonna be able to help you out. So you should definitely rent equipment. I highly, highly recommend it. You can use different cameras from project to project depending on if you need more dynamic range, higher frame rates, better color, cheaper, smaller cameras. It depends project to project, right? Different lights. Do you need LEDs? Do you need HMIs? What are you looking for? What kind of audio do you need? Is it something you need a boom mic that's higher end? Do you need windscreens? Do you need wireless mics? There are so many different components to production that it's really hard to own all the gear. I mean, you'd have to be filthy rich to own even a fraction of everything that's out there. So being able to rent it at these cheaper prices makes a lot of sense, especially if you're working for the production. Almost everyone who works in production understands that you want to rent for the project, but I find a lot of individuals who are looking to get something done are afraid to rent because they feel like they're wasting money. It's not the case. You're optimizing your gear for that project and you're saving a lot of money. Yes, you need gear that you buy and you own outright and you don't have to worry about paying fees over time, but renting definitely makes sense if you're doing a variety of projects with a variety of needs.